it's interesting, as we get into this, the speech that I'm going to talk about today, John Thurman, a good friend of mine, has a saying that words matter. So when I was asked to speak about the changing market, I inserted the word thriving into the title. Thrive means to grow well or vigorously. And if we're going to be what we want to be, Heath talked about it. Being a multi-generational company is a huge goal for us. And if we're going to be multi-generational, we can't just adapt to change. We just can't react to change. We have to thrive in the midst of change. So as we get into this and I start to talk about some things, we've talked about on the main stage for many years. Heath's talked about it, I've talked about it. I've been to other conferences where people talk about how fast things are changing exponentially with automation. I'm not going to really talk about the fact that things are changing, because I think most of us are going to just accept the fact that the world is changing in a rapid pace. I'm going to do a little bit of a deeper dive into some of the forces that are impacting the insurance brokerage business and having us be in a position to have to change. So what's driving the change? So the first thing I'm not going to spend any time on. I'm going to let Heath talk about this, Brian McDowell. They know far more about the tech changes than I know. What I'm going to talk about is the next three. The changing customer expectations, the data and analytics and how that impacts our business, and then how the workforce is changing, not just inside of IOA, but inside of our customers, our carrier and broker partners, and pretty much everybody that we do business with. So the first subject is changing customer expectations. And I'm going to make sure I slow down and say this right. The Amazonization of customers. I'm actually kind of proud of myself. It took me about 25 times to say that before I could get it out of my mouth right. So if you think about Amazon, and most people, I don't like to use absolutes, but most people have used Amazon. They are very, very good at personalizing customer service. And if you think about it, we're not competing, when we're dealing with a business, we're not competing with the best in our industry from a customer service perspective. We're dealing with the best customer service that client receives in any facet of their lives. And so when they're dealing with a company like Amazon, let's kind of go into what Amazon does and how does it impact business-to-business sales, which is the majority of what we do. Brian's going to talk a little more about personal lines. But about 90% of our company is either on the benefit side or the P&C side, business-to-business sales. They have a very easy procurement. It's very easy to order, very easy to do business with them. They've got a great technological infrastructure. They have a fantastic speed of delivery. And then they actually personalize through their use of data the interaction. If you go in and you buy something, at the bottom of the screen it'll say, customers like you bought this, or customers who bought that buy this. Or if you buy a product that their data shows that it has a shelf life of 60 or 90 days, 60 or 90 days later they'll say, hey, do you need a resupply of this product? Because they know that you should be running low on it. It's a very personal way of doing business on a very broad scale. So it impacts on how our clients look at us and how they expect us to provide service for them. So how do we respond to this? So the first thing is, and when I get into this, I want to take a step back for a second. A lot of what I'm going to talk about over the next couple of minutes is getting back to the basis. When I was brought to IOA 22 years ago this month, I had spent 10 years working for Auto Owners Insurance Company. I already had a CPCU, so I had a pretty decent insurance knowledge, but I didn't know what it took to be a good producer, a good insurance agent. A gentleman named Vern Dunow is the one who brought me over, and Vern had a long history in sales training, and he was a super organized, this is how we handle renewals, this is how we interact with our customers. and he really taught me what it took to be a good agent. And a lot of what I'm going to talk about now, pretty much all of it, what I'm going to talk about now is getting back to the basics of what it takes to be a good insurance agent. Jerry Lujan's going to speak a little bit later. His sales program, that's part of what he talks about is be really good at the basic blocking and tackling. And I've heard Roger Sitkins and others who are great insurance sales coaches, they all talk about being good at the basics. So if we're going to combat Amazon, we have to be organized. You have to know you can't let things fall through the cracks. They're not letting things fall through the cracks, and if you're not organized, you're not providing the customer service that your clients expect. And in order to be in being organized, you need to have a plan and you need to be systematic. You have to have a process, you have to follow it, you have to plan to it. So what you see up here, my son Kevin is a producer here at IOA. He's also got a master's degree in industrial engineering. This is a work process flow that he put together for our service team with every kind of client interaction that we have. And this is really important for us because it does a couple of things. One, it allows us to stay on track. We know that things aren't going to fall through the cracks. We also, by utilizing this, can identify the parts of the process that some team members are better at than others, what they like to do, what they don't like to do, assign tasks accordingly. And what ends up happening is, Heath talked about the talent war. We're in the process of increasing job satisfaction because the parts of people's job that they don't want to do, we're moving on because what we find is somebody on the team enjoys doing that. And if you enjoy doing it, you do it better. So understanding the workflow, our ops team, April and her team, they can absolutely help. That's a big part of where we're moving towards shared services is to try to get some of these processes done in a systematic, organized fashion so we can give better customer service and we can focus more on the client than we have in the past instead of getting into the mundane day in and day out things. Which leads really to the last piece of this. We have to get back to building customer relationships. 22 years ago, again, when I came to IOA, I went into John's office. He was always either our first or second largest producer. At that time, there was nobody with a book anywhere near his. I said, John, what's the success? He said, 2 things. Work 40 hours a week. He said, it doesn't mean come in the office and drink coffee. He said, come in and work for 40 hours a week. The second thing he said was, build relationships by taking people to lunch, feeding them, going to ball games, take them to play golf, build an actual relationship with your clients. And I can tell you for 22 years, I've never written an account through cold calling. I am purely a relationship salesperson. I took Vern's advice and John's advice, and that's how we're going to combat the Amazonization of our clients. They're increasing their customer experience expectations. We have to get back at executing on the little things that really have always been a part of our business. And I think during COVID it got more difficult, and maybe we kind of got used to, hey, I'm just going to send a text, I'm going to make a phone call. If your clients will see you and you're comfortable, you need to get back out in front of your clients. We need to build these personal relationships. So the next thing that is really impacting the insurance brokerage world is data. So Steve Thompson he and April are 2 newest members of the board. When Steve joined us 6 years ago, I asked him, I said, okay, he worked for the Hartford. He has a very good macro view of our business. He's had deep interactions with a lot of the biggest brokers in the business. I said, what do we have to do better? And he said, we got to get better at harnessing and understanding our data. There was no hesitation. And I had a little bit of an idea before that conversation with Steve, but I really didn't understand what data can do for us until I talked to Steve, and he kind of painted a picture for me. It was like a paint by numbers of, hey, this is really where we can go with this. We had started a project, I talked to Margaret Richmond shortly before that, about putting the NAICS codes, which is a 6-digit identification code in the system, so we could identify what it is our clients actually do. For many years, the insurance industry worked off of a 3-digit code called an SIC code. The SIC codes are much broader, and it's a lot harder for us to really identify what a client does. But that was pretty much the extent of what we had done at that time. So when you look at, one of the things Heath talked about us being multi-generational, when we met, we've had 3 or 4 off-site board meetings in the last 18 months to talk about strategy, organizational design, culture. We identified our #1 strategic advantage is our ownership structure and all the things that Heath talked about this morning. This goes into the data because we're fiercely independent and because we don't want to be for sale, we can do things like have all of our agency operate on one operating system. A lot of our competition works on 2, 3, 4, 5 operating systems because it's very costly to migrate the business over into one operating system. If they're worried about the quarterly return, if they're worried about a 3-year exit plan, they're not going to make that kind of investment. So it allows us to harness data in a way that a lot of our competitors can't. So when we look at the data, and I talk about this, I've used this quote in a number of presentations over the years. It speaks to me because it kind of hits how I view the world. Something that's worthwhile takes work to achieve the result. If it was easy, everybody would do it, and without that challenge, it's really not that worthwhile. So when I read this quote from Oliver Wendell Holmes, it applies to our data. There is a lot of work going in on the front end through the Epic optimization project and a lot of other things that's going to allow us to extract data in ways that's going to impact all of you. So who plays a role in this? Pretty much everybody. So we need our producers, our account executives and account managers. We need you gathering information, accurate information, and putting it into the system accurately. Garbage in, garbage out. If we have inaccurate data in the system, when our team starts to try to analyze that, they're not going to be able to get anything meaningful because what's coming out isn't really what the client does, or doesn't really accurately reflect the exposure base. Our data team, we've got at least 3 of the people here, and I'm breaking my cardinal rule of calling people out. There may be others that need to be recognized, but I know Philip Yang and Megan Canavan and John Woods are all in the audience. They're doing tremendous work on your behalf right now. So there are 3 projects that they've done that I want to highlight. The first of which I'm going to kind of gloss over because Chris and Bruce are going to spend a lot of time talking about the producer dashboard in a few minutes. It's an amazing tool that we could not have done without our data team. The second is a carrier management dashboard that we've been utilizing. Nancy Harris, Steve, regional presidents, managing partners, we've been using this dashboard for a couple of years where we're connecting, right now it's with 6 carriers and growing, their NAICS codes with our teams and what they write. We're a very frustrating company to deal with from a carrier perspective because we don't have centralized marketing. We like that personalized touch. As a former underwriter, I love the fact that the underwriters that are our partners are talking to the people who actually engage the client. I think it's a better flow of information. I think the carriers get better risks, and I think the clients get better programs when you connect the people who are on the street with the underwriters rather than having everything go through centralized marketing. But that's very difficult because now they have to connect with 300 teams across the country. So this carrier mapping appetite allows us to deploy the resources. So when the carriers ask us, well, who's writing XYZ type of business, we can tell them which branch, which producers, and our results with those carriers, we're growing faster with them than we are as a company. They're growing faster with us than they are as a company. Loss ratios are down, hit ratios are up, which means the underwriters are not working as hard. It's absolutely, it's been unbelievably successful for us over the last couple of years. The last thing that the data team's working on is, John Woods was telling me about this, one of the worst waste of time manual processes we do is having to go into carriers' websites and pull loss runs. We need this every time we do a claims review, every time we got to go to renewal. So they've deployed bots throughout the company, and these bots are out downloading. We're working with 10 carriers, downloading the loss runs directly into Epic, which takes out the human interaction in this. And we beta tested this on 4,500 accounts with over a 95% success rate. If you extrapolate that out over the course of, we need to get more than 10 carriers on this, we get all of our carrier partners doing this, the amount of work on our side and our ability to interact with our customers goes way up. So these folks are doing tremendous work. And the last group that needs to help us with this data is our carrier and broker partners. We need you identifying your book of business by the NAICS codes, but we also need you embracing and deploying your resources to allow our systems to connect with your systems. The insurance purchasing process is one of the most cumbersome things that our clients will deal with. It doesn't feel like anything else that they do. It's easier for them to refinance their house than buy an insurance policy. We have to do better as an industry because the clients are demanding it. It causes a negative interaction or negative thought in their mind when an interaction with us and our carrier partners drags out far longer than they think it should. So the last thing I'm going to talk about is the changing workforce. And similar to some of the other things I talked about, there's been a lot of, I've talked about millennials and Heath talked about the change in the workforce from a generational perspective. I'm going to kind of stay away from that a little bit. I'm going to focus on how the workforce inside of IOA, inside of our clients, and inside of our carrier and broker partners is changing. So this quote from Zig Ziglar talks about trust. The holy grail of any insurance advisor is to be a trusted advisor. The Independent Insurance Agency, one of the two big agents associations in this country, they call themselves Trusted Choice. That's not an accident. How do you become a trusted advisor? Well, some of it's the relationship stuff, but there's a lot of science around human beings trust people that they identify with far more quickly when somebody looks like them, acts like them, comes from a similar background to them. And when I was reading all these these different psychological studies, I came to an uncomfortable realization that that's actually very true for me. And what hit home was we had a tragedy here in Florida recently where the Surfside condominium complex collapsed. And a lot of people lost their lives. A lot of people lost their dreams, their beachfront condo. And it was just an awful event. And it really stuck with me. I read a lot of articles about it. The insurance agent who wrote the insurance on that is a friend of mine. He doesn't work here at IOA, but I would reach out to Freddie. How are things going? He had a lot of friends die in the tragedy, and it hit me that when a similar tragedy happens in another part of the world, in a far off corner of the world, I'll say, "Oh, that's terrible that plane crashed." Well, but it didn't affect me like when the Surfside condominium collapsed because it was more personal. I could identify with them very easily. And so when we start to talk about building empathy and building trust, it starts to become very important that our team look like the people that we're doing business with. If all of my clients stood up behind me, they're going to look a lot like me. Most of them are going to be sports fans. Most of them are going to have very similar backgrounds to me. That's generally the people that I do business with, and that's going to be true moving forward. So what I have here, I'm going to show some data up here. I'm not going to read all this. This is direct information from the U.S. Census about how the demographics in this country are changing. And this pace of change is not going to slow down. In the 2020 census, less than half of the people in this country under the age of 16 identified as white. So this pace of change is accelerating, and it has nothing to do with technology. It has to do with how the American population is changing at a rapid pace. But it's not just along the lines of ethnicity. It also goes into the number of women and how active they are in business. In the last 20 years, the number of women-owned businesses has more than doubled to in excess of 12 million. Over 18% of all businesses are owned by minorities. So if you think about the producer force in this room, in general, it doesn't look much like the numbers that I'm putting up there. Now, a couple weeks ago, Bob Peters and Chip Myers went to a conference, and Bob and I were talking about what I'm going to talk about. And Bob said, in this conference, it was for senior leaders and insurance brokers. And there was 225 people in attendance. He said that there were 9 women and no minorities. When you think about our industry, we have to get better at that. We have to get better at being more diverse. So from a recruiting perspective, James Baker and Aaron Slaughter are head recruiters on the producer side. They have a stated goal to help us diversify. They came to us and said, we want to help diversify the producer force. As a matter of fact, since we hired James and Aaron, 25% of all the producers we've hired help us with our diversity initiative. But they're limited by what our competitors do. So we've got to get a little bit better at bringing younger folks into the business that help with this. So what are we doing besides just James and Aaron taking that as a personal initiative to bring in some folks that are a little bit to help us with this diversity initiative? So the first thing we did was, when we talked about this as a board, we said, we have to get better at the inclusivity part of diversity and inclusivity. We have to allow for conversations and create an atmosphere where all of our people feel seen, valued, and heard. That's what's going to make us more attractive to people who are of different backgrounds. So we invested over 10,000 hours in the Gallagher training in 2021, and that organization is continuing to work with the board to help us with this initiative. I didn't type this right. We're not launching employee resource groups. We're relaunching employee resource groups. So a couple things. April is leading the Women's Council. They had a kickoff meeting last night. I think I talked to maybe 10 or 15 people that were there, and the energy around that was fantastic. So I want to go into a little bit of what an employee resource group is. Danny Anderson and I obviously talk quite a bit. We work very closely together. When we started talking about employee resource groups at the board level, Danny kind of took a step back and he said, I'm not sure that that's right for IOA. And then he came to me a couple days later and said, oh no, that IOA is perfect for employee resource groups. He took the time to do a little bit of research and really understand what an employee resource group is. People of a similar background who get together to share their common experience, to help their work life and help them feel more connected at IOA. That's perfect for us. We care about our teams. We need to be doing more of this. That's why, the Women's Council last night, that's why that's so important. But we also had another employee resource group meet this morning that some people may not realize is an employee resource group. Dan Middlebrooks led the devotional service this morning. I think it was at 6:30. That's a form of an employee resource group. We've had Christian employee resource group active inside of IOA since before I got here. And so when we talk about bringing in other employee resource groups, it's not to take anything away from what we've been. I love how connected people of a Christian faith feel to IOA. What we want is for everybody to feel that level of connection to IOA. And, you know, I'm going to piggyback on something Heath said earlier. He stands up every time Clark speaks and he says what he said this morning. That is not him checking an HR box. I think most of you know we're very good friends. I know him very well. He means that with all of his heart. And when we started talking about culture and the impact of Christianity on our culture at a board, it became very apparent very quickly that we have a wide range of spiritual and religious beliefs sitting on the board today. He's not saying that so we don't get sued. He's saying that because it's the truth. It doesn't matter what your spiritual beliefs are for how well you're going to succeed in IOA. So the last thing we're doing, and I hit on this earlier, is we're actively recruiting, but what we need to do is we need to bring more younger folks into the business that help us match the changing workforce, to help us match the changing business owner. We're having, Hayward Burnett is putting together a young agents retreat for September. And Hayward, I know it's a lot of work, I appreciate you doing that. And the purpose is basically, that's an employee resource group. Younger folks trying to build a book of business, getting them together so they can feel connected to each other, people going through a similar experience, also to help us cross-mentor, because, you know, in big meetings like this, a lot of our sales leaders don't get to spend time with all of our younger folks. Bringing everybody together, it's going to be a great couple of days. When the invitation went out, my daughter Marissa, who's also a producer here, came in and she said, "Hey Dad, you do realize there's 40 plus producers coming to this, 2 women. We have to do better than that. We have to start to bring in young folks." Dustin and his team do a fantastic job with our mentor-mentee program. What we need is our senior producers helping us identify folks and willing to mentor and bring in. It's a lot of work to be a mentor, but I can tell you it's really rewarding. We need to bring in folks to help us meet the changing business owner and changing workforce that we're going to encounter. So I'm going to leave you with this. And Heath and I did not talk about our speeches just like he did with Clark, but this is all about us being multi-generational. And if we want to be multi-generational, we have to thrive. And if we're going to thrive, we have to embrace not just the fact that things are changing, we have to look at the things that are changing and embrace each of those. We have to embrace technology. We have to embrace the fact that our customer expectations are changing. We have to embrace utilizing data and analytics to get better at what we do. And then we also have to embrace the changing workforce. Thank you.